You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet.
Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is brought to you by our brilliant sponsor, X-Deep, and by the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. Huge thanks to both for their support that makes everything you're about to listen to possible. Now, over the past 88 episodes, cave diving has featured heavily, and that's no accident. As you'll be aware, sidemount diving grew from the requirements of early flooded cave explorers. Firstly, the CDG in the UK, with others around the world following, and eventually building on sidemount diving, on the equipment we use, and on the techniques that we employ to give us what we have today. Now, in many ways, sidemount diving has evolved to the requirements of cave divers. However, sidemount diving today is enjoyed by many who never have, or in some cases never intend, to dive caves. Now, I recently posted to our Facebook pages some insights from the in-depth magazine Sidemount survey. This was part of the July issue that was dedicated to sidemount diving. It featured sidemount diving equipment, a who's who of sidemount, articles on the history, and yes, there was even an interview with yours truly. And I returned the favour by interviewing in-depth Editor-in-Chief Michael Munduno in episode 86 of Speaking Sidemount. But back to the survey. I thought the insights were really very, very interesting, but in many ways, not surprising. Some notable points for me. While a large proportion, nearly 60% of the divers surveyed dive sidemount in overhead environments, a whopping 90% also dive sidemount in open water. Access to valves was the top benefit gained by sidemount divers. Steel cylinders were slightly more preferred than aluminium or aluminum. 43% of sidemount divers don't dive caves. And nearly 80% of the surveyed divers have a tech qualification other than cave rebreather or sidemount. Now, presumably this is a deco diving certification, but this makes a lot of sense to me, as the reason you might initially consider diving sidemount is more gas and a redundant system, and this applies to deco diving just as much as it does overhead diving. Overall, super interesting, and thanks to Michael Munduno and the team at In-Depth for pulling these insights together. Now, given the large percentage of sidemount divers diving open water, I thought it was time we pulled together an episode on the fundamentals of sidemount diving and what it takes to get really good at sidemount. Now, as you may have noted, I don't tend to get involved in debates on sidemount on Facebook or other sites, but I recently had a discussion, let's call it, on the benefits or otherwise of sliding D-rings with Turk Vangel of Prana Divers in Bali. Now, Turk goes by the handle Turk Diggler, an awesome nickname by the way, and a great play on the star of the movie Boogie Nights if you didn't get it. Now, even though I didn't completely agree with him, Turk was making some solid points. So I thought, why not get him on the show and together go through our thoughts on what it takes to be good at sidemount, from soup to nuts, from beginning to, well, there's never an end to learning, as we'll find out. Now, add to that Turk has worked with Brendan Allen, my guest in episode 51, and also Ryan Custiori, episode 47, and I was really looking forward to having him on the show. Now, just as a side note, and I guess a shameless plug, much of what I'm covering here is also available in my ebook, Sidemount Fundamentals, that you can check out and purchase via my website at www.sidemountpros.com/store. Now, with that said, sit back and join me with Turk on the fundamentals of sidemount diving.
Hey Turk, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Hey, great to be here, Steve.
Thanks. Awesome to meet you. And we had a little interaction on Facebook a while back when we chatted on a post, so nice to meet you in person. And let's get started by getting you to tell us a little bit about how you got started in diving.
Well, I'm not as, experienced as some of the other guests you've had on the show. I started scuba diving in 2016 in Southern California. The reason I got into scuba diving is, I always wanted to scuba dive, but I kind of grew up in the Midwest of the United States. And, well, there's no ocean there. But I remember seeing the underworld of Jacques Cousteau and seeing those creatures. For me, it seemed like they were aliens. It didn't seem like they existed on this planet. So I was very curious. I was like, I need to see this someday. Eventually, I moved to Huntington Beach, California, and one thing led to another. I got diagnosed with a illness in 2016 that was supposed to give me 6 months to live. And at that point in time, I said, you know what? Now's the perfect time to become a scuba diver.
Wow.
So do it with a little bit of time I have left. Some clinical trials that worked, so I'm still here, thankfully. But that started my journey. That got me in the water, in the cold waters of Southern California. And then that eventually led me to the United Arab Emirates, where I spent 3.5 years there, working my way up through advanced side mount, and then eventually into becoming an instructor and a tech diver as well. Now I'm located here in Bali. I'm the dive operations manager and head instructor at Prana Dive.
Wow. Amazing story. I mean, there's so much to unpack in there. I mean, let's not worry about your sickness too much, but I'm so pleased that worked out for you. That's an amazing story. And I think California, I lived in both Southern and Northern California myself and have dived in both. And I think a lot of people don't realize how cold the water is there. I mean, it can be 100 Fahrenheit outside and the water can be way under 70 on a good day. But I remember really seriously enjoying diving out at Catalina Island, just a little bit south of Huntington Beach there. It's a really, really nice diving, and there's beautiful kelp forests and marine life. There's big fish there, big sharks there as well, which can be interesting, but it's a really, really nice place to dive.
Yeah, it is. And you're right. People don't realize how cold the water is there. It's funny for us people that live there because, you watch the tourists come in and they're on the beach and they're so excited to be in Southern California. And they run in the ocean and then immediately run out screaming because they don't realize that all of our water comes down from Alaska through the currents.
So you talked a little bit about how you got into diving, started in Southern California, moved to UAE. Did I see that you worked with Ryan Kustiari as well?
So during the pandemic, I went to California. And then once all that ended, even my friends knew I was miserable. They're like, you need to get out of here. You need to get back into diving. And got lucky that Landon Turner and Ryan from Key Water Sports were looking for an instructor to come over. So I got the offer to come to Florida and dive with them and work for them, which was a great experience. Landon is one of the owners of Deep Six Dive Gear, as you well know.
Yes.
And then Ryan's just a great side mount instructor. So to be able to be in that kind of environment, in a shop that sells X Deep, it only sells like the best equipment. There's no subpar gear that you're pushing to students. So it was a really nice atmosphere to be in and be able to learn a lot and take away a lot from that.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. I mean, when I went to Gozo Technical, it was exactly the same. I mean, they're both X-Deep and Razor Shop. Actually, that happened after I left there. But, when you start to hang out with superior side mount divers who have incredible base skill, incredible stability and balance in the water, it just changes your diving, doesn't it? I mean, I got a lot out of my time doing that. I'm sure hanging out with Ryan, I've spoken to Ryan a few times, had him on the show. He's very, very knowledgeable about side mount and side mount teaching in particular.
Yeah, I've been lucky to have quite a few people along my path that have been knowledgeable about side mount. And we have discussions. Sometimes those become a little heated. We all have our preferences when it comes to side mount. And because there is so many ways of doing this. Some will say that there's the right way and the wrong way, but there are some options when it comes to side mount, and we tend to stick with what we love and what we know, and we stand by it.
Yeah, very much like you. Coming out of Gozo in particular and training in Mexico as well, the way that I dive side mounts very much Mexico style, and some of that was, let's say, amended a little bit by what was common in Gozo. I mean, the biggest change there was we went from aluminum or aluminium tanks to steels. And they dive steels mainly because we're in salt water and also often because we're in dry suits for technical dives. So steel cylinders sort of come into being. And of course, you don't see them a lot in Mexico. You do in Florida, but then they dive different harnesses most of the time there as well and dive in a different way in many cases too. And so that's where some of the right and wrong can come in. My way's the right way, your way's not the right way. What I've learned, through speaking side mount, I've spoken to so many different great instructors. There's a lot of similarities, and I think when you look at it, you can talk about these are the principles that are the foundation of good side mount diving. But then all around that, there's all of these little nuances and differences in the way that you can do things. Here's a good example. Ed Sorensen, that guy is so tidy and so squared away, as I would call it, in the water, and yet he dives his rigs on the outside, as they often do in Florida, as opposed to having them inside, which is the way that we did in Mexico. So it's different, and yet both diving great side mount, but doing it a different way. Of course, you can argue what's better and why one way might be better over another. Ed used to say himself, as long as you've thought it through and you have a good reason for the way that you do it, then fine. Let's get into some of that. So you talked a little bit about what you did diving in Southern California, then going across the UAE, bit of time in Florida. How did you end up in Bali?
Well, one of my mentors, one of the guys that the reason I went to the United Arab Emirates is because of Brendan Allen, who you had on your show quite a while back.
Mm-hmm.
He
Yep.
brought me over to the UAE to train with him. He wanted to help me try to make it to instructor. And so he actually introduced me to the RAID system, which I fell in love with. I would fully admit that I have drank all of the orange Kool-Aid. I am RAID through and through. So
Good
I
man.
actually did my advanced course. And during my advanced course, I was kind of taking side mount at the same time. And I remember doing my first deep dive in the advanced course, which, because with RAID, there's 2 deep dives. I was at 30 meters on a wreck, and I'm a former U.S. Navy veteran. So wrecks I absolutely am passionate about. And I remember being in a single tank, and all I could look at was my SPG. I was just freaking out. I'm at 30 meters. I'm at 30 meters. My gas is going. It's gone. I barely remember the wreck. The second deep dive of that course I did in side mount. And that changed everything for me. I felt more comfortable in the water. I felt safer in the water. I didn't need somebody else to come to me and take care of me if I ran out of gas. I saw more of the wreck on that dive. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. That showed me what was possible to do with side mount. And as it sits right now, I have more side mount dives than I do single tank back mount dives.
Isn't it weird that once you get used to this double cylinder redundancy, extra gas, I'm the same. I mean, if I dive a single cylinder back mount now, I really don't feel as comfortable because, look, the truth is your emergency protocols now are very reliant on a buddy and also reliant on access to the surface if you don't have a buddy, neither of which I personally want to really rely on to that degree. And so having the ability to solve a problem yourself with your own equipment configuration, which side mount I think is absolutely the best for that, is just so comfortable and such a good feeling when you're diving.
Yeah, I agree. Brendan Allen bought this dive center that I'm working at currently. And then he called me when I was in Florida and said, hey, do you want to come manage? Yep, I'm there. So I came out here and I get questioned a lot of times by instructors here in Bali and also by my students and the people I'm guiding is, why are you diving side mount? Why? It doesn't make any sense. Well, I look at it as if I'm with somebody who I've never been diving with before, they're here in Bali, they're on vacation, they want to do some dives. I'm diving solo. I don't know if you can save me. If I tell you I'm out of gas and I'm in a single tank, you may give me gas, you may not. You may freeze, or you may just say, nope, not giving it to you. I have no idea what your reaction is going to be. So for me, I'm able to save myself, and that allows me to have that bandwidth, that situational awareness to focus on my students and not have to worry so much about myself, which I think is ideal in these situations. I get asked all the time, oh, you're in side mount. Are you teaching a tech course? No, I'm teaching an open water course. Well, you're doing it in side mount? Well, yeah, I'm in the ocean. I don't have to demonstrate any skills. It gives me more gas, allows my student to be safer as well because we have a ton of gas if we have any problems. So there are definitely benefits to it. I get questioned a lot on it. But for me, in these situations, it does not make any sense to dive single tank.
Yeah, with you 100%. And it's so easy. I mean, once you're adept at side mount, donning, doffing, getting into the water, out of the water, even in open water, and we have a lot of debate about whether side mount's suitable for open water or not, but you've just laid out the entire argument almost for why it is, because basically you've got a very, very adaptable, flexible system that you can put on and off in a variety of different ways. You've got so much gas, you've got redundancy, you're self-reliant. All of those things are things that, in my mind, are good for diving. So why wouldn't you dive it in open water? And what's the downside of doing that? I mean, obviously, we're comparing it now with a twin set, for instance, but I just find them so cumbersome, so heavy, so unadaptable,
I agree. And, here in Bali, I don't see this much other than other places I've been diving, but here in Bali, I see a lot of people, for better or worse, diving single tank side mount, which to me does never have made any sense. I'm not going to say that there maybe isn't a reason to do it, but you're losing one of the best parts of side mount, in my opinion, which is the redundancy. And also that stable base, right? Having 2 cylinders, one on either side of you, you get that really stable platform that allows you to just be in this absolute perfect trim. It's just so gorgeous to me in the water when you see a really proper side mount diver. And then you got this person on the single tank. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. You're losing, for me, the biggest part, my favorite part of side mount, other than my buoyancy and trim, is that redundancy. Why would I get rid of that?
Yes. Yeah. Look, I'm with you 100%. I did it once in Hawaii because I just wanted to try, and I had to because of what happened with the operator I was working with.
But the bottom line is the way that I would manage that. Let's say that you didn't want to, how do I couch this? Because I dive quite a bit with aluminium or aluminum 40 cubic feet cylinders and side mount. Okay. I've also dived with 50 cubic foot steels. To us, they're 6 litre, 7 litre. But the reason for that, so with two, let's call them 6 litres, I've got about the same as a LE80 with those 240s, of course. Yeah. But I've got redundancy, which is what you don't have with the 80. The same with the 50 cubic foot steels. Now I've got 100 cubic feet of gas, metric there, 7 litres. So I've got 14 litres, which is quite a lot, much more than you'd carry normally in a single. But I've got redundancy and I'm balanced, again, back to your point. When you're diving on one side, you can accommodate that and you can use a bit of body tension. And it was a bit of fun to try it, but I put it in the kind of monkey diving category where you've just thrown a cylinder on and you just want to go and have a look at something. And then maybe that makes sense. But if you're going for anything like a planned dive, why would you do that? Just choose two LE80s or grab a couple of smaller ones if you prefer that. And then it comes back to kind of what you and I were discussing a bit online, which is how do you set them up? All of these different cylinder types all need to be set up slightly differently. And so you need the ability to be able to understand that, and you can be taught it. But most of that I've learned myself because it's not something you're going to cover on a course is how do you dive these little tiny cylinders up to 12 litre steels, 11 litre aluminium. So anyhow, I digress. So let's dive into this a little bit now. I mean, you've made some really pertinent points about why side mount is such a great configuration. And let's talk a little bit now about what it takes to be a good side mount diver. And I think you talked a bit about this. These are the sorts of things that instructors should know when you and I were chatting online. So perhaps we start at the beginning, and for someone looking to get into side mount diving, what would you advise is the best steps for them to accomplish that?
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to find a proper instructor. And that is one of the most difficult things to do for someone who's maybe new to diving or just maybe new to side mount. They don't know who to go to. You go to your local dive center and you ask, can you teach side mount? Yeah, I teach side mount. But is this person diving side mount on a regular basis? How many side mount dives are they doing? Maybe they did 20 dives and self-certified, and they don't ever dive side mount unless they're teaching a course. I think you need to do your research. Look out to other friends, other divers who are more experienced than you, and see what's out there. Look on YouTube. Look for side mount divers in your area. You're going to find people that are posting stuff. One of the things that Brendan Allen and I have discussed, and I really would like this to happen sometime in the future, is trying to set up something to where we can say, like, we kind of joked around making it the Side Mount Education Association, or C. Basically, like, you would go to the website and you would be able to go on there and say, okay, I'm in this area. Where is a reputable side mount instructor that is predominantly diving side mount, that understands the configurations? And you could have a list of these people on there, whether they dive Razor or X Deep or the K2, whatever it is. You would have a list, and you can even break the list down into, hey, these are your X Deep instructors, these are your Razor instructors, and these are your K2 instructors. I think for us as side mount divers, because there are so many different configurations, we need something like that to draw people into the right instructors. It's so easy to get a bad side mount course. So I think first and foremost is research. And I think we need, as an industry, we need to get away from allowing people to just do 20 dives and then self-certify on side mount. Can you dive side mount? Sure you can. Do you understand the physics behind it? When you move your bottom attachment point, when you move that over a little bit on the cylinder, what is that doing to the physics of the cylinder? How does that work in relationship to where your D-ring is placed and to the length of your bungee and the tension of that bungee? These are all things that you're not going to get from a guy who's self-certified. He just doesn't understand it. I didn't understand it. I took a course, and Brendan did a pretty good course with me, but we were using a bunch of different configurations. I got a lot of information. Eventually, when I bought my own X Deep, I was like the second person that I knew of in the UAE to have an X Deep. No one else was really diving side mount there. And for me, it was, well, now I figured it out on my own. And it was a lot of in-water hours tinkering with things, watching videos of you and Gary Dallas and, some of the side mount people that I've looked up to for a long time, and trying to tweak my setup and get it right. And I realized in doing that when I became a side mount instructor, I didn't want my students to struggle with that ever. So I want to make sure that my students have a good course. Can I teach side mount in another configuration? Yes, I can. But I prefer my students come to me with their own gear, because a big part of that course is setting up that gear, and not just setting it up for them, but setting it up with them and allowing and talking about why we're doing the things we're doing. And so, hey, if you need to make a change, maybe your webbing around your waist is getting frayed, it's going bad, and you need to make a change. This is how you make those adjustments. This is where you're going to set your stuff and why you set it this way. And they come out of that with a harness that's completely configured, completely dialed in for proper cylinder trim, and an understanding of how it got to that point, not just here it's set up. That's the difference between an instructor who is a side mount instructor but doesn't do it frequently, and someone who is a side mount diver. I think there's a big distinction there is I'm an instructor or I'm a side mount diver. Like I said, I have more dives now in side mount than I do single tank. If you see me in single tank, I'm not having a good day.
Yeah, something's gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on. And there's a couple other things I would say too. When somebody comes to me to ask about a course, I always ask, why do you want to dive side mount? There will be a whole lot of reasons. Quite often you'll hear about back issues. You'll hear about shoulder issues from twin set divers where they can't reach their valves. I've got my hands behind me now trying to go over, but they can't reach their valves anymore. Gary Dallas, when I spoke to him way back, I think he was episode 2 or 3, he talked about that. He talked about, hey, do you want to dive with somebody who can't do a valve drill because their shoulder flexibility isn't good enough, or they're wearing such thick undergarments that how can you get your arms back there? So there was this access to valves thing. So there's all of these great reasons. But where I'm kind of fishing with that often when I'm asking as well is, do you want to go cave diving? Is cave diving your reason? Because, of course, that's where side mount came from. Or are you more of a wreck diver? Do you want to dive open water? And I can adjust because obviously I'm a cave diver as well. I adjust the course accordingly. If they want to be a cave diver, it's not that I'm not going to do this anyhow, but stability is so important in cave diving that I have to spend so much more time on that to make sure that they come out absolutely as stable as I can get them. The same with propulsion technique, for instance. If they're going to dive open water, it's a little bit less important, but I won't say that it's not because that's wrong. One of the underlying tenets of side mount diving is that you're stable in the water, and it's really important. But the things that you pointed out are spot on. And from my website, maybe you've got it on yours too, I've got a list of questions that people should ask. Do they dive side mount, or is it just another configuration for them? Can they display superior skill? Not only them, but also their students.
Yeah.
Interesting for me, like the shop that I collaborate with here in New Zealand, Global Dive, is, in my opinion, the best technical diving organization in New Zealand. They're amazing. And they've got great instructors. In many ways, they're way more experienced than me open water diving. These are 100-meter CCR wreck divers who have dived some of the greatest wrecks in the world sort of thing. So these are really serious divers and instructors and great guys and women as well. But I've either taught them side mount or I've side mount workshopped with all of them. And I've built their side mount skills. And a lot of these guys are now going into cave diving. And they're all side mount instructors as well, right? But when somebody comes and says, hey, I want to do a side mount course, they send them back to me because I'm the side mount specialist, right? I'm the guy who only dives side mount all of the time, everywhere I go. And so that's the point that you're making, isn't it? That, is it just another configuration or is this their thing, right? So spot on, man. I love that. And so many people, I remember talking to Thomas Mishura about this. He made the point, look, you're going to spend so much money on your equipment, no matter which harness you buy, and buying 2 regulators and setting them up for side mount and buying some cylinders if you're going to get cylinders as well. You're spending all of this money on equipment. Why wouldn't you invest a similar amount or at least a decent amount of money in getting a good instructor for that? And we're not going to be the cheapest necessarily either, are we?
No.
I mean, you're paying for a specialist skill.
Absolutely.
So you're paying for what we've learned. You've traveled the world, so have I, to learn the skills that we've got now. Okay, so we've got a good instructor. As you go towards the course, the next thing you started to talk about was equipment, and I think that's very much what comes next. It's choosing the right equipment. Obviously, I'm an X-Deep diver. You know that. You are as well.
Yeah.
We love X-Deep, but you rightly pointed out there are some other good harnesses around that people can dive. I like the K2. Dive Right have just come out with a new one that looks surprisingly like the others as well, which is good. We won't comment on that, but I guess we're all iterating around getting close to the complete solution there. Which is fine. But I mean, choosing the right equipment is important, and then going to an instructor that needs to know how to set that up. On your courses, when you get your students bringing their own equipment, let's talk a little bit about how you go through fitting that equipment to their body, because I think that's really important, isn't it? Everyone's got a different body shape. So what are the steps that you go through to make sure that they get the right fit of their equipment to their body?
Well, I mean, I think it's the basic standard harness fitting. Well, not necessarily. If it's a single tank, you're diving in a back plate and wing, and the harness fitting is a little bit different. But, making sure that you get that top pad located in between the shoulder blades there in the right position, and then getting that lower lumbar pad where it needs to be. And so I set that up first and foremost. That's the first thing that's going to set everything else. That sets your base for your entire harness. Once that's set up and dialed in, and I show them, hey, this is where it needs, I physically touch them, hey, this is where this needs to be. If you ever have to change this for whatever reason, this is what you're looking at. I even go so far as to take measurements and then say, here, you can write this down. You can put it in the notes in your phone. So if you do have to make a change and maybe you're having trouble with it, you know that this is the measurement you're looking for.
Are you actually standing with a measuring tape between their shoulder blades and then their lumbar spine and measuring their back? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'll set up the harness. So I'll set up that the lower lumbar support in the top piece, and then we'll take the harness off, and I will do a measurement from like on the X deep from the bottom of that shoulder piece down to say the top of the lower lumbar.
Right. And
say this is a measurement. So in between here, that's the distance you're looking for. So they can go set that up in the future if they need to.
Right.
And then once that's set up, it's, we go to the shoulder D-rings and then the waist D-rings. And the waist D-rings, I tell them, I'm going to give you, it's going to be like a ballpark. And then we will dial that in when we get in the water. We'll make some adjustments on dives 1 and 2, or basically I start in the pool first before I do anything else. Get them in the pool because they have to do frog kicks and helicopter turns and all those things and get their stability right. So I do that in the pool first. It's one of the big things we do here is we put everybody in our pool. People are more comfortable in a pool. They spend more time in the pools than they have in the ocean. There's some sort of the psychological thing of I'm safe in a pool. So it helps them relax a little bit. And in a new configuration, I think that's extremely important.
Yeah.
Then once I get the D-rings on, then we go to the cylinders. How do we set our cylinders up? Where is keep your harness on? Where are we measuring? So we're measuring from the top of the armpit, from the top of my arm. I don't actually measure there. My measurement's a little different. I pull out, we look at our bungees. Where's our bungee at? Because that's going to determine from the bungee to the D-ring is what we're looking at, not the armpit. Because what if I want my cylinders a little bit below my armpit? Some people like them up higher. Some people like them lower. Depends on how you're going to dive it. So we make that measurement. I show them that. And then I have a little trick I do when we set up our cylinders, because our divers are always like, well, this is great, Turk. Your cylinders are always set up. They never come unrigged. You don't ever have to change them. I'm like, you're right, but watch this. And I reach into my bag. In my regulator bag, I have a string. And that string has a little loop on one end. I drop it over top of the neck of the valve, pull it down, and it's right to the top of my cam band or my worm gear Jubilee clamp.
Well done.
And so I tell them, we're going to set your cylinders up. And once we have everything dialed in, we will make a piece, and it's just cave lines, all I'm using. Take a piece of cave line. We will set one up for you too. And it's a real quick, throw it over, boom. That's the height I want. You're good to go.
That's the first thing I'm going to do after we finish our conversation. I'm sick to death of carrying a tape measure and remembering what my number is.
I used to forget my number all the
time. Well done, mate.
That's the reason I came up with the string. I was like, I don't remember what the distance was. But now a piece of string, and it always lives in my reg bag. No matter where I go, I'm good.
All right. So far, that's the idea of the day.
Yeah. Glad I could help, Steve.
All right, let's carry on. Now we've got the height of the band from the neck, and you've measured from under the armpit. And as you say, under the armpit, there can be a difference of 50 millimeters or a couple of inches in there, depending on how you like that to sit under your armpit. And I absolutely agree with that. And now you've found the position of the band, whether it be a cam band or a Jubilee clip. You're going to put a clip on the bottom there. And the positioning of that clip around the circumference of the cylinder is also very important and different between steel and aluminium. So talk a little bit about how you do that.
I do mine probably a little different than some people that dive aluminum 80s. There's a lot of talk that you should put it directly across from the hand wheel or at like a 1 o'clock position if you're looking down from the top of the cylinder with the hand wheel being at 9 o'clock. I move mine more towards, basically it's like if you're looking down the cylinder with your left cylinder, your hand wheel being at 9, my bolt snap is about 1 o'clock.
Got it. Yeah, that's great for aluminum cylinders. If I just add my 10 cents on that, the great thing about putting it there is as you clip that on, it's obviously going to be tuned. Your hand wheel's going to come forward on you, and that's not where you want it. However, as soon as you put the loop bungee on and it torques it in the opposite direction, it pulls it back around. Yes. And then the other beautiful thing about aluminum cylinders from that point of view is as soon as they become buoyant, all they do is pull in tighter.
Yep.
And it's a really beautiful feeling, isn't it? When it pulls into your body, I always talk about it becoming part of you.
So now the cylinder is not separate from your body moves, the cylinder goes with it. And while it's not so tight that it's uncomfortable, it can be quite firm in there in terms of being part of you. I love that feeling.
You know what? I was just telling somebody this 2 weeks ago. My favorite part of any dive is when my cylinders start to become positively buoyant and I move into my front D-rings. It's almost like sounds weird. It's almost like a little hug that your cylinders are giving you. And everything feels so tight and just perfect. I love that feeling.
Yep, spot on. And I'll just make the distinction. I don't know if you dive steels very much. In steels, you do want to bring them back a little bit. So on that left cylinder, it's going to be more kind of 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock, or 9 o'clock and a little bit past 2 o'clock. So I still tend to have mine not quite at 3. So we're talking left cylinder, maybe a little bit back towards 2 a little bit.
Okay.
But a little bit different because steels, again, are heavier. And if you put them too far around, they just tend to fall forward a bit. And so that's kind of a little distinction between aluminum and steels. Obviously, you can play around with that a bit and see what's going to suit you the best. And what is pertinent to that too is the tension on your loop bungee. So your longer loop bungee will change the way you're going to do that as well. The looser you have that, then that could alter the position as well. There's some very good video too if anyone's looking. I don't know if you've done any Turk, but Misha's done some great video as part of his double ender series where he doesn't talk about that positioning, but if you have a look at the way he's set up, he's very much where you are. He's kind of in that 1, 2 o'clock position there for the left cylinder. So you can pick up lots of little things if you're observant enough to watch some of the real masters out there, of which he is absolutely one. Cool. So let's carry on. Have we finished the cylinder from your point of view now? We've done the band height. We've got the position of the clip.
And making sure that you have, especially with aluminum cylinders, making sure that you have a zero length leash. That's extremely important.
Yeah.
That's got to be, absolutely has to be zero length or nothing else is going to go right.
Spot on. And there's a difference too. So the Florida style guys who are attaching the base of their cylinder back to rails and those sort of things tend to have a longer leash on there. So this is where we're very much talking about harnesses like the X-Deep harness, the Razor, the K2, and the new Dive Right perhaps. But some of the older ones, the Hollis SMS 75s and 100s and so on, you had rails at the back that you would connect to, which, like, I never loved that. And I always thought, you know, what happens if you turn on your side or you turn, that thing's going to fly around and go all over the place. So I really like what you said. Steels as well. I have a very, very short length of paracord that's connecting my clip to whatever the band is, and it's basically only long enough to allow the clip to move. The hole where you put your finger through is basically right on the band, and it can fold, but that's all it can do. It doesn't have any more distance than that. It's good that we agree. It's a sign of your intelligence that we agree with each other.
Well, I've watched a lot of videos, and I will be honest, I've listened to every single episode of Speaking Sidemount. I was there for the first episode. I'm a side mount nerd. I fully admit that. If it's side mount, if it's out in the world and it's side mount, I've probably seen it. You know, Misha's videos. This guy with 10 cylinders is ridiculous. I mean, obviously you're never going to dive that, but to watch that he's able to do that and prove that it's, you know, you can be stable in the water. I learned so much from people like that, and that's why I spend a lot of my off time scouring the internet for people like him and watching those videos.
Yeah. I want to get on to Misha a bit later on when we talk about practice and perfecting our skills, because he, as a role model, is absolutely almost perfection. There's a few others around these guys. You know, Patrick Widman is amazing in the water. Ed Sorensen's amazing. There's a bunch who you just look at them and go, oh, my God. This is a bit of a joke, but he'd say to me when I was training with him, he'd say, look, Steve, I'm absolutely motionless. What, am I a magician? And sometimes you want to answer yes, you know. It's just being set up right in practice, I promise. So, okay, so we've fitted now the harness, we've fitted the cylinders. The next is the regulators. Let's talk a little bit about regulator setup, what you do with hose lengths and so on.
Yeah, hose on a bungee on my left side, and then diving a 1.5, 2 meter long hose on the right side. So I dive the Deep Six Signature Series regs, which have a little bit of a longer turret on it, which is nice. It makes for really easy deployment of that long hose when you need to deploy it. I've been diving those regs for quite some time now. I love them. They're bulletproof. I dive the a short inflator hose, obviously on the 5th port on my left cylinder. The bungee backup goes up and around my neck, and then the long hose the same way. I will mention that I do hard clip my cylinders when I'm entering and exiting. Unlike some of the divers you see in the Florida system where they have a piece of bungee there and it's just a bolt snap on the hard clip, I use double enders on mine, and I teach my students to use double enders as well. So we hard clip in, we get in the water, and then on descent, we can unclip the hard clips, take those double enders, and we put them on our drop D-rings in the back. On the ascent, we clean up, put those back on, a hard clip in for our exits. But I'm diving first stages up into my armpits too. I know Ed likes to dive his down. Chris Richardson, who is a friend of mine and one of the owners of Deep Six, is good friends with Ed. And him and I had talks. I'm like, I don't know why anyone would dive regs down. He's like, well, Ed does. And he knows that I, look up to Ed as somebody who I think is great in this industry and good for side mount diving, good for the industry as a whole. But yeah, I dive mine up to protect them. I want them protected from if I'm in wrecks. I'm not a cave diver yet. That's coming hopefully this next year.
Cool. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment. That's brilliant. Yeah, and you're right. Look, and I think there wouldn't be anything wrong with somebody wanting to try to do that. And if you happen to be in Florida or at Mariana and you want to go and dive with the guys at Cave Adventurers, I'm sure they'd be willing to show you how to do that well, because I don't always see that done well either. And they certainly have superior skill and set up there. So that's a place you could do that. I mean, I'm always one to try things. I mean, I've tried using the toddy clip as well from the toddy style side mount, which again is quite different from what we're talking about, another different way to do it. I remember I saw Toddy in the water when I was in Sardinia. I just happened to meet him on the beach. He was teaching a side mount course and incredibly streamlined, really good looking setup, and obviously he's the inventor of it and dives it exceptionally well. So it was good to see that, and it is different. It's just another way of solving the same problem. And the amount of thought that he's put into it is really the key to it.
Oh, yeah.
There's so much thought into every piece of it. Yes, it's different from the way that we dive. Yes, you have to dive aluminium cylinders because it doesn't work that well with steels, handing them off and so on. But certainly nothing wrong with that. It's just another way of doing it. And you just kind of need to choose what's going to work for you.
Yeah.
So I talked about regulators. I think the important point you made there with fifth ports as well. So the fifth port for your inflator hose and also for a dry suit hose from the right side if you're going to wear a dry suit. And then SPGs, you do see a little bit of lollipopping of SPGs. I'm not a big fan of that. And often that comes from when you've got regulators out. I believe it's better to have them tucked away. Downside of tucked away, it's a little bit harder to read them. You do have to have a skill to be able to loop them up and have a peek.
I don't actually.
That's just something that you practice.
I can reach back, grab my SPG, take a look.
Yes.
I've practiced it. I've done it.
I did notice on one of your videos, it looks like you're using transmitters. So I do as well.
So yeah, diving transmitters. I always hear the argument, well, what if your transmitter fails? Well, what if my SPG fails? It's still one failure. It's a single failure. I'm going to end my dive. That's what we do. We're trained. If we have a single failure, well, in open water, we're going to come up. We're going to get out. And transmitters work beautifully. I can just look at my computer and I know exactly how much gas I have in both cylinders, and I don't have to reach around
I've talked about that transmitters quite a bit, and I agree with you completely. And just to add some additional nuances to that, first thing is I think I noticed your transmitters were screwed straight into your first stage, which is the same way that I do it as well. I don't see any point at all in putting a hose on there and introducing a hose and a swivel as additional failure points. Not that they fail that often, that's not the point. And the second thing is they don't get in the way. I've had them occasionally get looped up on the bungee, but you can easily move that out of the way. So they're in a good position there, they're protected. And then secondly, if they fail, just as they would with an SPG, provided that you've planned your dive, you should at any point in your dive have sufficient gas with a reserve to get back to the surface or to the exit of your overhead. That's all part of dive planning. So there shouldn't be any point in the dive where you go, oh my God, I don't know what my gas is and I don't know whether I've got enough to get back to the surface. That's not the way it should work. You've screwed up your planning if that's the case. So the idea is that, let's talk in a cave parlance for a moment. If I'm diving thirds or quarters or whatever it is, at any point in that dive, provided I haven't exceeded my gas rule, I should have enough gas to return to the exit. And all I would be doing, let's say it's my left cylinder that I don't know anymore, I'd just be switching every couple of minutes. The idea would be that I just use time or pressure on the other cylinder, and it would be really, really easy to manage. So I don't see a downside to it. I've yet to have a absolute failure of a transmitter in the water. I have had an SPG leak on me, but that wasn't a big problem. HP leaks are never really a big problem, or rarely are they a big problem. I've had transmitters that briefly lose connection, but then regain their connection again. And I have had batteries go flat. Of course, you've got to change your batteries.
And see that, I mean, look at the history of nitrox. It was the devil's gas, and now we're all using nitrox. And then, oh my gosh, you have a dive computer. Why are you using a dive computer? We should be diving tables. They tend to push technology away until it's proven that it's okay for us to use, which I guess is okay. I mean, you want to make sure that what we're doing is safe.
Yeah, I agree. And I know people who dive both.
which is basically having a transmitter and an SPG. But for the reasons that I've just explained, I don't think it's a good idea. Spot on. Okay. So we've fitted the equipment to our body. So we've found a good instructor. We've chosen the right equipment. We've done the research. Again, as I said, I'm a very, very strong X-Deep advocate. They sponsor this podcast, been big time supporters of Speaking Sidemount. But I need to make the point. I started Speaking Sidemount 5 years ago, would you believe, Turk? So this month is the 5-year anniversary. I'm really proud of that. But I started diving X-Deep 10 years ago. Again, to the month, this is the 10-year anniversary of me doing my first Sidemount dives, or my first training, let's say, and first cave training. And so I was diving for 5 years with X-Deep and absolutely loved it before they became involved with me in terms of sponsorship. So, and the reason that I sought them out as a sponsor was because I love what they do. And so I've said that before, but just to make that one really clear. So let's move on. So we've now got the right equipment on our body. We're fitted. We're hanging out with a really good instructor, and we're about to get in the water. What comes next?
Well, I think before we even get in the water, we have to talk about donning and doffing and the different ways we do that. So, and I always talk to my divers. You kind of touched on this earlier, but when we talk about, when they come to take a course, I like to look at it as beginning with the end in mind. Like, what is your end goal? Is your end goal, are you just going to be diving open water? Are you eventually looking to go to wreck penetration or maybe caves? Are you going to be diving, most of your dives are going to be from shore, or are they going to be from boats? So understanding what your student is going to be doing allows me to better tailor my course for them. If they're going to be doing shore dives, just shore dives only, and never really doing any boat dives, then that's going to change how I teach the donning and doffing a little bit. If they're going to do mostly boat dives, then that's all I'm going to focus on is how we set up, kind of like Meisher's double ender series. You know, how do you put a cylinder on a boat? That whole process, because developing those, that muscle memory of left cylinder hose, going through all that process is extremely important, and them getting comfortable so we don't hear those arguments that side mount divers take forever on a boat.
Yeah, got it. Let's go through the differences, because what I tend to do is I always don the same way, you know, so whether I'm standing in the water on a shore dive or at the entrance to a cave, whether I'm floating in the water, either upright or in trim, donning my equipment, the process for me is always the same. But then there's just a couple of additional steps if I happen to be on a boat, and you mentioned double enders and safety clips and those sort of things. Is that the same way as you do it? Do you follow a very similar or identical process?
It's absolutely the same no matter what I do. Again, there might be an added step here or there. You know, am I going to hard clip in? If I'm in the water and I'm waist deep, then I'm not hard clipping in because I'm getting ready to do my descent anyway. But yeah, it's exactly the same process every single time. And that's what I teach my students, because when you develop that process and you're good at it, it doesn't matter if suddenly you were doing all shore dives and now you're someplace that only does boat dives, you still use the exact same process, just in a slightly different manner.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess you've got the added benefit of donning equipment in the water, which is a great benefit of Sidemount in terms of its flexibility, being able to don in the water, because it's so comfortable in terms of the water taking the weight of the cylinder. And of course, if you are donning on a boat and have to put the cylinders on, you've got to deal with the weight of your cylinders, which is a bit of a problem. That's the hardest part about it. But once you, again, know what to do, and of course, as I said, on a boat, and Misha showed this, you know, one of your options is jump in the water and have your cylinders handed down to you. And there's a bit of an argument around, well, kind of you're inconveniencing your boat crew. And my answer to that is, that's what they're paid to do. They're paid to support me.
Absolutely.
You know, they want me to tip them at the end of the trip, and they're there to do a job. It shouldn't be that hard for them to hand cylinders in. And in truth, I've never had a problem with that. Provided you brief them well, they know what you want them to do. And so for me, the easiest way is jump in the water, have them hand me my left cylinder, I put it on. It takes 15 to 20 seconds. Then I've got gas, I've got buoyancy control, hand me my other cylinder, and I'm away, you know. And a little bit like Misha, I love the idea of, okay, if the conditions are a bit rough, I can descend to 6 meters or so and don my right cylinder underwater if I need to. So there's lots of ways to do it. There might be occasions where there's ripping currents and so on, and you don't want to do that in the water. So if that's the case, yes, you need to be able to do it on the boat. And you're right, I agree with you, clipping in double enders to make sure you've got a good solid connection and are not compromising your bungees is a great way to go. Brilliant. Donning and doffing, I land drill that a lot before we go anywhere near the water. So we sit on a step or on a bench, and everyone gets to do it on dry land where, as an instructor, I can communicate with them and give them direction and support and so on.
That's really important.
We have tables out front here. I'll set them on the tables on the bench, and they'll sit in between them, kind of like they're side mount diving, and we'll go through, all right, now I want you to switch regs. So do your reg swap. Yep. All right, now your left cylinder is free flowing, or you have bubbles coming from the first stage, feather. And we go through kind of almost all of the skills that you can do on land, drill them first. So they start to develop that muscle memory and then work that into once we get in the water.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing that I tend to focus on really early, and kind of pick this up way back when I was hanging with Steve Martin a little bit, one of the things he focuses on really early is getting your weighting and trim right in really shallow water. So he's basically doing a weight check, and he's got a 1, 2, 3 method of communicating lung volume. So a 1 is 20% lung volume, a 2 is 50%, a 3 is 75 to 80%. And the idea is that with 20% lung volume, you should sink. With 50%, you should be stable and level in the water, neutral buoyancy, and with 80%, you should ascend. So by using kind of a holding up 1, 2, or 3 fingers, you can communicate whether you should be ascending or descending if you're weighted correctly with no gas in your BCD or dry suit. So that's a really, I think, important thing early on. And then figuring trim out as well, which you can adjust with weighting. So they're early in the get in the water stuff. And then obviously the base side mount skills. So I do a lot of swimming around early in my courses.
Is that just once your cylinders are on, because I get them to don it first. So don everything in the pool, getting them used to putting that cylinder on. And now just go down and just swim. I want to see you swim. And we just watch that. That way they get a feel what the configuration is like. I get to see what how their cylinders are reacting every time they kick. Maybe we need to make a slight adjustment to where that Jubilee clamp is that's too far up into their armpit. Because when you're looking at side mount, it really is like the death of a million micro adjustments. A really tiny adjustment in side mount makes a really big difference. Some of the other systems, I move my cam band on a single tank cylinder up an inch, down an inch. Doesn't really matter. If you move that Jubilee clamp up an inch or down an inch, that makes a massive difference in side mount. So it's really these micro adjustments that make a difference in side mount. So I want to see, we've got it in land, but I want to see how it's reacting in the water and how it's sitting on you. Do you look comfortable? Some people, they don't like when their valves under their armpits, it shoves their arms up and they feel like they can't move. So let's get it into a position where you're comfortable and you can still reach everything and do the skills you need to do. So it's just, like you said, get them to swim around and be comfortable in the water. Then we start looking at making all adjustments, gearing just a little bit, or the Jubilee clamp, check the tension of the bungee, because I don't ever get everything super tight on the bungees. We'll lock it off and get everything done once we're sure that we got everything in trim. In trim with full cylinders and in trim with like 35 bar in each cylinder. So once we know we're dialed in and you're not going to look like some of the divers that have the butt end of their cylinders hanging up, my students will not leave my course like that. Once we know we're good, then we lock everything in.
And mine know if they ever see me in the water somewhere, they better be squared away as well. I make the point to them, as I said earlier, you're a representation of me. And if you don't care or you are not doing a good job of trimming your cylinders, then that reflects poorly on all of us. So show a bit of professionalism, take a bit of pride in your skills. So from there, let's think where we're at on a course now. So now we're swimming around a bit. We've been practicing. I'm assuming you've got them regulator switching, so they're getting used to that, gas management. I saw you did a video the other day about single-handed signals, and so that's really important for tech diving, side mount diving, is being able to communicate gas pressures in a tech diving method.
Hand signal?
It always drives me nuts when I'm diving with someone who tries to give me the paddy, half a tank or something. I can't for the life of me remember what any of that is about, and why would you not do tech diving one-handed numerical signals, which is so easy.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that doesn't exist at open water level, because it's so much easier, regardless of whether you're working in PSI or bar. It's so much easier to communicate what your gas pressure is.
Yeah. Now, I know RAID teaches it that way. RAID has you do the one-handed hand signals in open water course. And being where I'm at, I get people that are PADI divers, SSI diver, SDI, NAUI, French Federation, everything. And that's one of the very first things I ask them before we get in the water is, how do you signal gas? I need to know how you're going to tell me how much gas you have. And I've seen some really weird hand signals in the water. And I show them mine. I show them, okay, this is how you don't have to worry. I have 2 cylinders. I got plenty of gas. But if you want to ask me, feel free. And this is how I sign gas. And they look at me like I'm crazy half the time. Like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, it's one hand. We can use one hand. Of course you can use one hand. Because what if I'm holding an SMB in my other hand at my safety stop? How am I supposed to do that T for 100 bar if I'm holding an SMB? You can't. So it's easier to use it with one hand for your adjusting your buoyancy. It's surprising to me that, and it happens almost on a daily basis here, that I've never seen that before. I don't understand why we haven't transferred to that, but that's another point.
Yeah. And the way that I look at that too is on this side mount course, this is the way that you're going to communicate gas pressure. So I don't allow any other methods, and they have to learn it. From 6 through to 9 is a little bit tricky at first, but once you've done it a few times, then it's super simple. As you say, really easy, and from my point of view, very clear. So we're not having miscommunication, and I think we make a good point here about land drilling all of the signals that you're going to do in the water as a safety and communication before we get in the water. Cool. Let's move on. So there's the base skills. One of the most important things, which I touched on earlier, was stability, and this combination of buoyancy control, trim, and balance. Balance meaning left and right, trim meaning fore and aft, so from your feet to your head, and then trim being horizontal. And a lot of, I know, back mount divers, I'm going to get into you guys again right now, but look, for heaven's sake, being in trim does not mean 45 degrees. It doesn't mean 50 degrees. It doesn't mean 65 or 70. Mm-hmm. It means 90, right? It means horizontal. Now, there are exceptions, and if you're following the bottom of a cave, for instance, or something like that, then fine, or you're following something, but you still do not want your feet down. You want your feet up. So the bottom line is knees and feet up. It's a big Ed Sorensen thing, by the way, as well. I think it's really important for a whole lot of different perspectives. Number one, you're in the water. Why would you not want to be streamlined to your direction of travel? And you cannot be streamlined if you're not in horizontal trim, the direction you're moving. Secondly, decompression during ascents. You don't want your feet down at a different depth, and that could be, for some of us, that's a couple of meters. For me, not so much, but it's still important. And it does give you the opportunity to be incredibly stable, and it's a great way to dive once you can do it. So how do you work your students from this beginning? We know what the end game is now. We know that we want to have good buoyancy control, so we're controlling our depth in the water column. We want to be in trim, and we want to be in balance. How do you teach that? Because it's not something that's necessarily easy, is it?
No, teaching buoyancy isn't easy, especially if you're teaching everything to be done neutrally buoyant, which is how I do it. My students are never side mount. Of course, they're not going to kneel on the bottom, but even in single tank, if they're doing an open water course, we do not kneel ever because we don't dive kneeling. So it can be a challenge to get somebody to be perfectly balanced. And a lot of times, especially when we're talking about trim, I know I had a problem with this when I first started doing it, is getting someone perfectly flat in the water. We're not used to laying flat down with our face looking down. Mm-hmm. So it almost feels like you're going, your feet are coming up over your head. You almost feel like you're almost inverted.
Yes.
But you're not. You're like, no, you are flat. You are in trim. So what I do is I start with just buoyancy. I don't know, depends on where they're coming from, what their level of buoyancy control is. But we start with buoyancy, just get you neutrally buoyant. I want to see you do a neutral buoyant hover. And then, see what their swing is in the hover. Just get them comfortable, obviously with no fin movement, no hand sculling. And then once we can get them comfortable with that, I like to take the fins off of them because the fins do, as we all know, the fins give you some more stability. That no fins, it's surprising how much stability you get from just a pair of fins in the water. And they don't have to be perfect with no fins on, but I want them to see that you are getting some stability from your fins. So we look at that. We look at their hand position. Are your arms extended out more? Are they a little bit closer to your body? Where are your legs positioned? So, if you feel like maybe you're a little head down, extend your legs up just a tiny bit. You're changing that center of gravity using your arms and your legs and they're just small movements. It's not massive. And we talk about that, and then we get in the water and we do it. Then once they have the buoyancy to a decent level, and then we can build that up to the next few dives, then it's just looking into our propulsion techniques, obviously, and our drills. Propulsion techniques are very big for me. Yep. I've seen people do the flutter kick and side mount, and it's never made any sense to me. I'm not sure why you would go to side mount and then still use a kick that doesn't do anything but keep you moving constantly. The great thing about the frog kick is it does have a built-in glide cycle, which is almost like a resting cycle. And it's also more reef friendly because you're not kicking sand up everywhere. You can, and in side mount, how low can we get to the bottom? We can get super low to the bottom and little frog kick, and you'll be able to see whatever you want. So I work with that with the propulsion techniques for sure. I want them to get into being flat and making sure that we get their fins flat. That's an extremely important part for me. And something I know because I struggled with it when I first started doing frog kicks. My fin tips are always up. And then you kick and it doesn't propel you in the direction you want to go. Just like when you try to back fin for the first time, if your fin tips are up, it's going to pull you up to the surface. And one of the great things I can do is I can set up a camera. Now, I'm not holding the camera, mind you, but I can set up a camera in the pool and I will videotape what they look like. And we do this in the pool, and then we get out and I can debrief like, oh, he's like, oh, my fins were flat. I was this way or I was that way.
Yep.
And the great thing about that is you can show him, he said, I was in trim. Well, no, you weren't.
Yeah.
Here's the video. Let's look at this. See, you're actually 10 degrees head up, but I felt like I was flat.
Yes.
You did, but you were not. Or your fin tips are up. Using that video debrief. I know it's kind of gone off the topic a little bit, but the video debriefs I think are absolutely great for students. It's something we should be doing more of, especially when it comes to side mount and the skills that we're learning in side mount.
100%. And I learned this again, Tom Steiner, Steve Martin, big proponents and big users of video for teaching. And as you rightly point out, one of the problems we have in the water, one of the challenges as a student is that you don't 100% have the mind-body connection to understand when you're in trim and when you're not in trim and the shape of your kick, because you just physically can't see it. Yeah. And so, we're very visual. And so your feel versus visual, there's no connection whatsoever. So using video is incredibly important. One thing that Audrey Cadell taught me was she puts her camera on her wrist, but it's on like a Goodman handle. So the bottom line is she's actually physically not holding the camera. Her hands are 100% free, so she can still accomplish everything she needs to. I know there's some standards issues around carrying cameras and so on. I believe that's a little bit like we talked before about transmitters. I think that's a bit of a carryover from the old days. And any instructor that's any good will be able to manage the fact that if they have an emergency while they have a camera, they can still deal with it. I'm not talking about someone 100% focused on filming. I'm talking about someone 100% focused on teaching who is using a camera as a tool to assist that. As you say, it gives you the ability to feedback. And I've had the same experience. I've had students to say, I thought I was in trim and now I see I'm not. I thought my frog kick was good. I can now see that my left foot is actually slicing through the water. You made the point of fin tips. I call it floaty fin tips, where the fin tips are pointing up. That's obviously terrible for propulsion, but it's even worse if you're trying to be stable, because you're trying to be still in the water and trim and your fin tips are up. Any movement whatsoever for your fin will result in propulsion, usually forward. And so you'll find you're unable to hold a position in the water, because if you just even move them a little bit. We learn this when we're doing back kick. Just a very small amount of a kick when you're in trim and you're properly streamlined will result in you moving a significant distance. So a very small little frog kick can move you a long way. And so a little movement of the fins is really bad. And again, another really good reason to do no fins training. And I forgot to mention Jake Ballman before from ProTech in Mexico is an absolute master of that. And we did a really good discussion on no fins training in episode 82, if anyone wants to refer back to that, because Turk, I think it's a great thing to use in training. I don't do enough of it, I think, both personally and also with my students. So it's something that I want to work on myself, having come out of ProTech training and having seen Misha and others do it. All right, let's move on. I think beyond the base skills, the donning and doffing, regulator switching, gas pressure checking, cylinder trimming, and then, of course, getting your relaxed static stability, this triumvirate, if you like, of buoyancy control, trim and balance. We've then got our emergency drills to do. What happens when something goes wrong? You talked of fluttering the valve for some sort of leakage, often a second stage leak that you can't control or something like that. But there's others, which obviously culminates in gas shearing, I guess, is the big one. I teach gas shearing like cave diving. I do two different types. We do the same gas shearing technique with the long hose, but we either do an ascent if we're in open water, and then I teach them how to do the fundamentals of a overhead exit. How do you teach gas shearing on your courses?
I think probably the same way a lot of us teach it. I teach gas sharing using obviously the long hose, and it depends on the environment we're in. If we're diving here in Bali and we're on a reef dive, we are going to do an exit side by side, because typically what we do is we're swimming out to a point, we're swimming along the coast, and then we come back and up a slope to the beach. We're not necessarily doing in the blue ascents. We are swimming back to the beach and up the slope. So we're going to be side by side with the one diver having the compromised diver having the long hose around his neck, reg in his mouth, holding onto the hose, and the diver who is donating gas with his arm on that diver's elbow for some sort of control. I do also teach in the blue ascents. So having divers face to face, obviously deploy the entire long hose, get some distance, and then making that in the blue ascent. I think it's good to know both because you never know where your students are going to be diving.
Yep.
And I guess that's basically how I teach out of gas drills is I do both side by side. Oh, I also do forgot about that one. The inline drill, because I do have some side mount divers that come to me and they want to, they're looking at in the future doing wreck penetration. Sure. So I think it's very important for them to understand how to donate that hose in a single file situation, where the compromised diver goes, where does the donator diver go, and then how you do touch contact and speak to one another, because now you're single file. And I tell them, I don't know how you teach this, but I tell them, like, when we're doing touch contact, if you're in an environment where that's going to happen, that is also something you need to be debriefing or briefing beforehand on, hey, if we're in an emergency situation, 1 squeeze means this, 2 squeeze means that, or pull or push, whatever signals you're going to use, you need to make sure that you are talking about those before you ever get in the water.
Yeah, lots of different ways to do it. And again, from cave training, a lot depends. Are you gas shearing? Are you just zero visibility exiting? Yeah, there's a lot to that. I tend to not go into it too far because that does make up a lot of your advanced rec course or your cave training itself. But I just give them the beginnings of it. So yes, we do touch contact. We do the arm squeezes and so on to catch tension, the shunt forward to go forward, the squeeze to stop, and so on. So absolutely. And then understanding that if you decide to take this to the next course, then that course is going to be all about teaching you things like touch and go if you're in zero vis, not gas shearing. And then if you are gas shearing, this is what we do. This is how we change from one side of the line to the other side of the line. And on it goes. There's quite a bit. There's very involved as part of those courses. So I kind of leave that to there because you don't want to overload your students with too much information that really doesn't belong in the foundational course as well. But certainly they need the beginnings of it.
I just basically do the 3 different types of gas sharing. So in the blue ascent facing each other, single file, and then side by side.
Yeah.
And then I don't go too much in depth on the single file, but I like to show them that, hey, this is how it's done. This is the reason the whole long hose was invented for us scuba divers in the first place, was single file. And then when you get into, like you say, when you get into further courses, you're going to get very involved in single file gas sharing.
Indeed you do. Usually blindfolded.
Yes.
All right. So probably the last step for us, so we talked a bit about drills and everything now. The last thing was practice, and we were talking a little bit about Misha earlier, and I saw an awesome quote. It came from Patrick Woodman, and it was, hard work outperforms talent when talent doesn't work hard. I thought that was just awesome, and it accentuates what I learned from Misha as well about the way that guy practices. He used to be a professional musician, and he applies the same diligence to practicing side mount diving as he did playing drums, which was he practices a minimum of 2 hours per day every day. And you can only imagine how good you get when you do that, and especially when you work hard and also you focus your training around perfecting particular skills, which is what he'd do too. He'd have a training program for himself. And so I can only emphasize for people who want to be good in side mount is the importance of getting good instruction, setting your equipment right, just everything we've said, getting it fitted to your body, learning the skills that you need to learn, but then practice. And every single dive, give yourself something to do. Yes. The thing I try and do in all of my dives is just try and relax as much as I can. Be slow, be still, be stable, really focus on that. And then at the same time, work on all the other things that you want to work on, whether it's some drills or whether it's on your propulsion or your stability. Always give yourself something. I think it makes my diving, in my opinion, more interesting as well, because you've got something to focus on rather than looking around at reefs or a wreck that you've dived plenty of times. Anyhow, that's just a little bit of my philosophy.
I mean, every dive for me is a working dive, in a sense. Yeah. And that's how I've looked at it for a long time. You know, when I get in the water, whether you know it or not, if you're with me on a dive, you may not realize I'm working on something. But I am working on a skill every single time I'm in the water. And that's the only way to get better. I don't have any desire to be a good side mount instructor. I don't have a desire to be a good tech instructor. I'm going to say this, but I'm going to talk about it. I want to be the best. I absolutely want to be the best in the industry. Will I ever be the best? Who's to say what the best is?
Right.
But if you aspire to be the best, then you're going to become a great side mount instructor. You're going to become a great tech instructor. If you're just I'm good. For me, that's not good enough. That's why I'm constantly, looking. Like I said, I've listened to every single episode of Speaking Side Mount. I search out side mount videos on the internet, constantly looking into how the configuration is changing, what we're doing with it. Because I always want to be right there with the curve, the learning curve, and making sure that I'm not getting lost somewhere along the line and I'm not missing something that I could be giving to my students. I want my students to have the best possible course they can. And the only way I can do that is if I'm pushing myself to be the best.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, and two aspects to that too, I think. Your own practice, your own personal practice, and then the investment that you make in your own training. You mentioned that you want to do cave training. In my opinion, cave divers are the highest level of diving technique that is displayed. If you look at the basis, the foundations of buoyancy control, trim, balance, all those sorts of things, certainly cave divers tend to be very, very good at that. They're also very good under pressure because they practice working under pressure. All of your drills are done blindfolded and so on. And so it is quite challenging. You mentioned that you're looking for some cave training. Were you going to go and do cave training? Is that the next step for you?
Yeah, that's the next step for me is cave training. I dive side mount. I also dive rebreathers. So next step is cave training here. Actually, I just had this conversation the other day with a bunch of instructors. They thought it was kind of brilliant that I do this, but I want to find something in diving that is just for me, that I don't teach, because that allows you to you're not going to burn out. It's really easy to burn out if you're constantly teaching the same courses and all your dives are on these courses and you have nothing where it's just fun for you. I got into this because I love this. I'm passionate about diving. I'm passionate about being in the ocean. I'm passionate about being on wreck.
Yep.
But I need something that's just for me to I'm getting a little burnout. My students, I'm teaching all the time. I need to go recenter myself. And that's going to be cave diving for me. So now I can just go. I'm not going to ever be an instructor in cave diving. I have zero desire to be a cave instructor. Never going to happen. That's going to be something that I just do for fun for me.
Mm-hmm. And have you thought about where you're going to go?
Well, I'm lucky. I have a friend of mine, Chris Richardson, who is Ed Sorensen's buddy, the instructor, cave instructor.
Yeah, I met Chris and Mariana when I was there. We had a chat at Stacks and Blue when I was there with Ed.
Yeah, so Chris is going to come out here and probably going to go over to Sulawesi.
Yes.
Which, as you know, they just found a bunch of caves over there. So we're going to do some cave training over there. I'm very excited for that. Because I'm passionate about wrecks and wreck penetration. And I've always thought, caves don't really excite me too much, or they didn't. But I wanted that level of training to bring into my wreck penetration training and my wreck penetration diving. Because I think you can get some wreck courses out there that aren't that great. And those skills directly transfer into like real proper penetration in wrecks.
Sure.
But then the more I looked at caves, the more excited I become.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of looking at caves with like stalactites and stalagmites and those formations and put me in there, please.
They're both awesome. I mean, I love wreck diving. Like you, I'm ex-Navy, so I mean, I love diving shipwrecks. It's just one of my favorite things. But I love caves as well. They're subtly different, and the skill sets do transfer over. I think if you're a good cave diver, you certainly can go and have a look at wreck diving. I would temper that with there are some very specific things about wrecks that are different from caves that you might want to do an advanced wreck course for as well. But if you turned up for an advanced wreck course, for instance, as a full cave diver, or even intro to cave level, you're going to be way ahead of someone who has not done any cave training. I don't know that the converse is true. If you're an advanced wreck, are you necessarily going to be great at cave? I think you could be. It depends who you trained with. But no, fantastic. And look, Sulawesi, my mate Robin Quest is there. So you have to look up Robin. I'm sure
Robin was just here. He was here in Ahmed 3 days ago. So, yeah.
Awesome. You could have given him a punch in the scone for me. He's a great guy. And on my way back to Australia this weekend. So excited to go back. But last time I was there, Robin was there. Actually, the time before. But we had some great dives together. And he's a super nice guy. So I really do want to go to Sulawesi myself and have a look. All right, mate, it's been amazing. Thanks so much for sharing. I think it's been really good from my point of view to be able to go back to our roots and do an episode where we talk about the foundations, if you like, of side mount and the fundamentals and the things that are important as you're getting started or as you're trying to get better at side mount diving. So that's been really good. I've appreciated that. It's been great to meet you, and I hope we can maybe have a dive sometime. I haven't been to Bali, so I remember when Yvonne Press was there, I was sort of promising I'd come over. So
I still need to do that. It's reasonably close to New Zealand, so there's no real excuse.
There you go. No, thank you for having me on. It was really an honor to be here and great to talk to you. And hopefully someone out there can listen to this and benefit somehow in their side mount diving. Also, if anybody ever is in the world and they're looking for, they're not sure where to take a good side mount course, you guys can reach out to me anytime. If I don't know somebody, I will find somebody in your area, no matter where you are in the world, that is a great side mount teacher that will be able to guide you in the right direction, because I don't want to see anybody get into a bad side mount course.
Yeah, brilliant. Your place in Bali there was it Prana Dive?
Yeah, Prana Dive.
Yeah, you had your own personal dive handle as well, was that right?
Yeah, Instagram, I'm Scuba with Turk.
Okay, brilliant, mate. Well, thanks so much, and we'll catch you again soon.
All right, Brad, thank you very much.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did making it. It was phenomenal to catch up with Turk, to meet him, to learn a bit more about his diving in Bali, and also to freewheel with him and to and fro on the Fundamentals of Sidemount Diving. You may have noted that we kind of arranged it a little bit like a sidemount diving course, so it was brilliant to be able to go through that with you, and I hope that hit the mark. Thanks so much to X-Deep and also to the patrons of Speaking Sidemount for their support of the show. It means so much to what we're doing. And don't forget, if you want to know more about the fundamentals of sidemount diving, go check out my ebook, Sidemount Fundamentals. It's available for purchase via my website at www.sidemountpros.com/store. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast and would like to support the show, then why not become a patron of Speaking Sidemount? For as little as $5 per month, you can become a part of the Speaking Sidemount team, get exclusive early access to all of the episodes, and help us to deliver the very best sidemount, cave, and technical dive content available. Just go to www.patreon.com/speakingsidemount for all of the details. The address is also on our Facebook page, listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us for our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.